Hello everybody, this is Gregory with 5-Minute Catholic Apologetics and Living, where 5 minutes of your time may get you to the divine. Today we're going to talk about what I think, in my humble opinion, is the most demonic influence on us in America today. Now before we begin, let's start with a prayer. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritui Sancti. Amen. Gloria Patri et Filii et Spiritui Sancto. Secutor in principio et nunc et semper et seculi seculorum. Amen. Now we know, like, if you look at the temptation of Jesus, that the devil offers all the principalities to Jesus. So we know on one level the most demonic influence on the world is the devil. No doubt the devil tempts us every day. But I'm looking at something a little more tangible. And I think the best way to look at this is, let's look back at in 1820, 1590, 1142 AD. What kind of world were we living in? Yes, it was a world with, humongous child mortality and drought and pestilence and all these horrible things. But if you look at raising your children and you look at the milieu, the surroundings that you had around you, they certainly weren't perfect. We know the parable of the wheat and the tares. There's always been good and bad in us and people around us. Even if there was always jails, there was always prisons in any time, in any place on the map of human history, because there's always going to be good and bad. But let's just use any of those times. What's the biggest influencer on you and your children? It's really the church and the culture that you live in. There's no other influence. So if you are enmeshed in a very Christian world, then the values around you are Christian. So whether you were living in rural France or rural Spain or rural Poland, everyone was Christian. At this time in Christendom, they'd be Catholic Christian, but everyone was Christian, and that was the unifying force. So it had Christian values, Christian morality. And you could really say this was the case until about a little over 100 years ago. And what really changed? We had a unifying cultural voice that came out. What's that? Technology. In particular, if you look 100 years ago, that's when we started getting radio. And then later, radio went to television and movies. Now, you would say, so what? Well, understand, again, the number one factor in influencing you and your children prior to technology was the church, your church. Protestants was your church. If you're in Geneva or if you're in Sweden and you're a Lutheran, was the church and church values. But now you have an outside force. So if you look at the early movies, the majority of the early talkies in the 1920s, 1930s, were pretty consistent with family values. You look at the early radio shows, most of them were pretty consistent. And if you look at like the golden age of Hollywood, yes, there was some risque stuff, but as a whole, it was pretty good. And it was till the codes were taken down. There were codes in movies that you couldn't show people having sex, you couldn't have profanity, all these things. When the codes were taken down in the late 60s, then you saw the ushering of edgier stuff that was contrary to Christian values. And you and I are of a time where we're just used to this, right? So we don't know another time when it wasn't that way. But if you go back to 1840, 1880, 1692, it was a very different thing. With the number one factor influencing your values and your lifestyle, lex credendi, lex vivendi, lux orandi, lex credendi, lex videndi, as you say, is the church and what your family's teaching. Nowadays, let's be real, it's Netflix, YouTube. Netflix and YouTube influence our children much more than we do. And we have been contaminated by Hollywood, the main purveyor of this stuff. So if you look since the 70s, it is the norm where every virtue is now a vice and every vice is a virtue. What do I mean? I mean, you could look at shows you could look at movies, like super risque movies. You think of the auteur directors like Coppola, like De Palma, like Scorsese, these guys. Think of the movie Last Tango of Paris, just open sexual acts, open profanity. All this became, cutting edge, let's clap, all these things. And so what happened was, what was normalized? Profanity, violence, premarital sex, fornication, divorce, all these things. And if you look more recent, like my generation, we grew up watching Friends. Or more later, you look at like even Big Bang Theory or How I Met Your Mother. Like, these shows are comedies, but what values are they really pushing? The aforementioned, right? premarital sex is normal. Think of the R-rated comedies going back to the 80s with Cheech and Chong, but certainly with the Seth Rogen movies of 20 years ago, right? Normalizing illegal drugs, like all these things. So when your kids are coming of age now, they're coming of age in a worldview that is antithetical to Christian values. And if all their life is this stuff, and let's say you look at something like gay marriage, if they've been watching this stuff and now they're teenagers, your voice is the minority voice. So when you say, look, there's no such thing as gay marriage, homosexual marriage, they'll, yeah, but you know, all these shows have it. They won't say it this way because they've been anesthetized, almost inoculated, contaminated, vitiated, whatever you want to call it, by these shows that have normalized this behavior. That, like, Mom, Dad, you don't know what you're talking about. The church doesn't know what they're talking about. The church is intolerant, like when it comes to gay marriage. Or the church is backwards when it comes to fornicating or contraception or even abortion, these things like that. And so we live in a world where unless you are putting your kids in a bubble where they're not being exposed even to YouTube or to any sort of Hollywood or Silicon Valley influences with social media, you're in trouble. So what's the number one demonic force? It's really what's being pushed by Hollywood. Hollywood's motto should be corrupting the youth since 1920, because that's what they've been doing. You know, it's incrementalism. It's like the boiling frog. Like at the beginning, it wasn't as bad, but now it's just ratcheted up 100-fold. 100-fold. So I would say Hollywood, like if you look at the past and compare it to now, that is really the number one factor. Yes, the devil's always been around. Demons have always been around trying to influence us to sin. But now the greatest voice that's whispering in your ear is the aforementioned. The aforementioned, even if you're following good Christian YouTubers or watching this, you know, Cry of Freedom or the Passion of the Christ, whatever, the kids are still, whether it be at the public school, whether it be through their apps, their phones, whatever, they are getting corrupted by these things. And so what can you do? Put them in a bubble. And I've certainly had discussions with them at a very early age. Why does the church teach this? Because you're in an uphill battle no matter what, living in 2025 America. You are in an uphill battle, but you got to arm them with the truth, and you got to teach them apologetics and teach them why Holy Mother Church believes this very early on, because if you don't teach it, they're going to get these influences, and then there's going to be, you don't know what you're talking about, Mom, because blah, 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 all these influences. You can throw in liberal teachers at their schools. All these influences are cultural Marxist influence, and they're all teaching a message that's antithetical to Christian values. Guys, post in the comments. I'd love to hear from you if you agree or disagree. Until next time, take care and God bless.